Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1373. Aleph Shin Ayin Gimel. And we're learning is the process of the compilation and the composing of the Mishnah, and he's going to contrast that with the Talmud. So this is a generational flow that begins obviously at Mount Sinai, with God giving the Torah to Moshe, who passed it on, Torah Tzivalon and Moshe, Merosha Kilis Yaakov, he passed it on to all the Jews. And this, the process of the transmission of Torah, which is so critical, because without that, clear, how do we know what God wants of us? How do we know what was passed on is accurate? You know, when you play telephone, even same people in one room, the same generation, the same time, the same place, you know, you whisper to someone the word watermelon, you cut around the room, it'll come back the word elephant, whatever. So the preservation of the integrity of the transmission of Torah is a critical piece in understanding God's relationship with us. So here's not the place to go into a long discussion of all the built-in immune systems that God created to make sure that the Torah would be preserved and quality control would be maintained through the generations. What he is covering here is Mikra, of course, was given in a written form, the written Torah, and we learned about that. And there, every letter is precise and everything is in that form. Mishnah and Talmud, Mishnah, Braisa, and Talmud, I should say, since Mishnah breaks into Mishnah and Braisa, is the oral interpretation, the oral Torah, which is explaining the written. And as we discussed relatively at length, that the written Torah is brief, and the oral Torah is elaborate. That's why Torah b'Pirusha nitna, in the words of the Rambam, the Torah was given with its explanation. Pirush of the Mikra is Mishnah, and the Pirush of the Mishnah is Talmud. So we're discussing exactly how that was passed on. So to sum up, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, or what he called Rebbe, or later Rabbeinu HaKadosh, what did he do? He gathered together all the shmuz, everything that was passed on, ish mipi ish, word of mouth, generation to generation, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, all the way back to Hashem. He gathered it all together, clarified, make sure everything's clear, and with the consensus and support of the Chachamim of his generation, he documented that. And that's the body of Mishnayos that we know, the Shisha Sidre Mishnah. Before him, it was all oral, and it was being forgotten. That's the reason. It was being forgotten, but you could also include that at some point, there would also be plenty of different disagreements and lack of clarity. By putting it down, he documented forever for posterity that which was passed on. And as the Rebbe Rashab made it very clear, Hakol haye bebirur gamur b'li shum bilbul v'taruvis u'bli machlekes klal. It was all clear, like he says, like the Oir of Chochma law, in other words, of divine wisdom within Torah Shabiksav, radiated in the Torah Shabal Peh of that time, and everything was very clear. The fact that there is machlekes, like he says afterwards, he qualified, we learned yesterday, we find that the words he used, so he explained that we're talking machlekes here, not disagreements between them, meaning they disagree in the meaning of something, but disagreements that go back from the beginning of time, from the beginning of Torah when it was passed on. That's how it was given. And I actually looked inside the Shalah that he quotes. He elaborates on this. But the point was very clear here. It was given in kavim, because that's how a real full seichel can go in many directions. When you stretch it, there's the kav chesed and kav gvura, like he said, shleimus haseichel, to use here the words, shleimus hu b'chinas hakavim dafke, not kav echad. It's not just one approach. different approaches. So that was also passed on very clearly. So when there's two opinions, it's actually two opinions that go back all the way. When Hashem said to Moshe, Mem tes panim tamei, there are 49 positions to explain something impure, 49 explanations Torah. So that too was passed on. Another thing was the issue of achra. Was it resolved? Did it remain different opinions, or was it resolved? And that's when Moshe asked Hashem, what will we do? So he said, Achra rabim lahates. That you'll follow the consensus. So the consensus is also a key point here, because there may have been a consensus before the time of the Mishnah as well. And that's why in some Mishnahs you just have stam. You don't have a disagreement. You already have the achra. But you have everything combined. Bottom line is, all of that is part of the Kabbalah. The Rebbe Rashab then went on to say that the achra was, what does that mean? This is actually a quote, like he said, Fiat Vekish Larabim Ba'isi Akav. So Shammai, for example, his neshama gravitated toward Gvura, Hillel toward Chesed. But when there was the consensus, the Dvekus was of the Rabbim, of the majority, that Kav, and that's what Kroita and Ati and Ashba into Malchus. So let me explain that a bit more. I actually posted now in the group a mimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe that also discusses this concept, that essentially Mikra, we said, is Chabar of Atzilus, Mishnah is Chagas, and then Talmud is Nehi. So in the language of the Mittler of the Frierdiker Rebbe's mimer, interesting expression, he says, Mikra is the letters themselves. That's the most important part. It's not so much the understanding and not so much the details of a halacha. It's the Kedusha Sa'asius, every letter is so precise, and because it's it's rooted at such a high level, like we learned Chabar of Atzilus, so it comes into Asiyah. In Mishnah, you already have the kavim of Midas, Chagas, Kosher, Osir, Mutter, Kosher, not Kosher, Treif, Posel, and so on, like we said, Isser, Tomei, Toher. So the Mishnah already breaks it into kavim, which is compared to Chagas, to Midas. And the main focus of Talmud is explanation, the reasons. So though we also have some reasons in the Mishnah, but it's the Talmud where it's far more elaborate. Just adding a little more spice to the concept. So bottom line is, so the Mishnah is clear. Now the Hachra, regarding the Hachra, which means the resolution, when they came and they resolved an issue, so he says, so the Rebbe Rashab explains, that in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, it's mashmed achra is but something they didn't hear. And the Cheves Alavavis brings that as well. He quotes it. In other words, something that they heard clearly from their teachers. Let's say in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, let's say there was a disagreement and there were two different opinions. And then it was resolved. And everyone followed one opinion. So that also became something that was a Kabbalah ish mipi ish, that there was a consensus. There was a resolution. So he's saying the things that are consensus from the Gemara's mashma is bedover shalei shamu. It means something that they did not hear. So they came to a consensus at whatever point in history where they decided that let's follow the majority and we'll all follow the majority. Not that everyone will do whatever their teacher is teaching them. Okay. Then he finally brought from the Gemara and Seita, the Mishnah and Seita, I should say, that from the time Yosef ben Yezer passed away, the Eshkolis, which means the unity, it ceased to be, because till that day, Ad Yemeim lo yoyim machlekes b'chach Yisrael, everything was said, came from the way it was said from Moshe b'Sinai. When did it start changing? So he said, Hillel v'Shammai, that's when Ad Hillel v'Sham nimshcha Kabbalah, this Kabbalah that was received generation from generation, was to Hillel v'Shammai, and they disagreed on three matters. From the way he's explaining it, like I said yesterday, it appears we're talking now not the disagreement that comes from Sinai, where the Hashem said this approach and that approach, opposing opinions. But here it appears that it's starting to actual disagreements. And and as their students multiplied, there became more disagreements. Then he continues and says, and this is the last thing we learn. I'm reading from inside. Rebbe and his Bezdin, or Bezdin, Osfu v'kiptzu kol hashmuas kanal. They gathered and collected all that which they heard and received from their teachers, as I said, chain in a link, flame from a flame, all the way back. Ubiru echia Kabbalah, and they clarified what was the exact Kabbalah. In other words, they did have to clarify what did they actually hear. So essentially, Rebbe, basically what he's saying is Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rebbe, discussed it with everyone around and said, so what did you hear from your teachers? And he put it all together. He gathered everything that was heard. It would be like what we did in Chazorah. Everyone hearing the Rebbe speak, and then we gather together and say, what did you hear? And we clarify, and then we document what was heard. So that's what he did. How was the actual reception? What did we receive? And he adds now, from heaven, they helped him. Why is that important? Because you want to make sure. Remember, a human being is still a human being, even Rebbe. Even those that received, even though, like he said, there was clarity and there was no confusion, but still, so God helps to make sure that when you have the Yiras Shamayim that these great sages had, that they would be mechaven, make sure that what they heard is accurate, and that's what the Mishnah is. And that's where we stopped. So we have now a very, I would say, quite comprehensive description of the process of how the oral Torah became doctrine, became canonized, meaning written down, that now we have it in Mishnayos, we can learn Shisha Sidri Mishnah. Okay. However, the next step is what happens next. Remember, because you read the Saderis, the generations diminish, and also the Golus that we learned earlier, even about Braisa, even the time of Tanoim, they also had to elaborate further because, so to speak, the Atzilus was descending further into Bria. So essentially what you see is that the transmission of Torah also parallels and mirrors the times. So when you have a darker time, you need further elaboration of Torah. I mean, this is essentially one of the reasons why Chassidus was revealed when it was revealed. So the two main reasons given why the Chassidus revealed in the later generations. One is because the darkness became more intense, so we need a deeper light. We need more strength. We need more inner Torah to inspire us, to connect us, and so on. Second reason is because it's like Erev Shabbos, Friday, tasting from the foods of Shabbos. The Rebbe has a beautiful sikh in Chelik Tazvav and Likutei Sichos and Yutas Kislev, and explains they're both interdependent. That when it's dark, that before the dawn is darkest, and when it's darkest, you have to reveal from the taste. You start tasting from the food of Shabbos, which is the Mashiach, Teirasa Shel Mashiach, which is Primus HaTorah. So the same idea is said. Why there was Mishnah was a document when it was documented. The same thing. Eis lasis Lashem aferet teresecha. Rabbeinu HaKadosh and his colleagues saw that the Torah would start being forgotten. Remember, this is right at the end of the time of the second temple, which meant the centralization of the Jewish community, which already was somewhat scattered. Because after Bais Rishon, after the destruction of the first temple, there were already Jews that did not return to Israel, and they were living in Babylon. That's why you have Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi, the Babylonian Talmud and the Yerushalmi Talmud. There were Jews living in different places. But after the second temple, then it would really disperse, because all the Jews were exiled then. So that, among other reasons, indicated a time that they would need to now document. Same idea. So the times dictates how much of the Torah is revealed and how much you have to explain. It's just like when you have a great student, you don't have to say much. You just can say it briefly and he'll understand it. When the student knows less or is more distracted or he's even of a lower level soul, you need further explanation. And that's what he's going to now explain and continue. I just want to add one more thing which may be helpful here. when we are speaking about Torah, I mean, I said it, but I didn't maybe elaborate enough. I think it's good to point out. When we keep speaking about Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, and their location as in Chabad, Chagas, Nihi, and then as it manifests, Chabad goes down lowest in Tasiyah, because this comes from the highest. Chagas goes down not as low, but lower into Yetzirah, Mishnah. And Nihi goes only into Bria. This isn't just to give a location, it's actually the process of the Torah manifests in Seder Ishtalshalos to help us create that interface. Remember, if the Torah was not given, God forbid, we'd have the whole Seder Ishtalshalos, but we wouldn't have the tools, the wisdom, I would say the blueprint, the actual roadmap of how you climb this ladder. How do we understand how God created existence? Even learning what we're learning right now means that it's Torah that's come down from the highest levels all the way down below to give us the ability to understand and to live by the rules and God and will of God. Second point is this, that neshamas also go through this journey, even though he hasn't spelled it out yet. But if you remember in the beginning when he started talking about neshamas and about Torah on page 1350, he said that both neshamas and Torah are called what he called Adam, because both of them, the neshamas also go through the Seder Ishtalshalos. So essentially, when you say neshamas of Atzilus, and then neshamas of Bria, neshamas of Yetzirah, and neshamas of Asiyah, these neshamas all are being connected through the Torah of their respective world. That's what connects them. That's why you have Torah of Atzilus, Torah of Bria. In some ways, you can even say that the neshamas of, let's say, Yetzirah may be the neshamas of the Tanoim. He didn't say it explicitly here. He did speak much, much earlier. If you remember, he spoke about nesham, different levels of neshamas, biti, achesi, imi. I have to look back there if it relates to this. But regardless, the point being is that neshamas also go through these levels. So the fact that we understand what these levels are in the worlds helps us also understand how we refine these worlds as we travel on our journey in the interface of connecting the divine and existence, which is through Torah, the blueprint, Istako Baraiso, Bara Alma, that God looked into the Torah and created existence. Okay, now to take it back to where we are, so we're up to what Rabbi did, Rabbeinu HaKadosh did, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, in compiling and composing the Mishnah. So now that he, with the help of the vine, of the heaven, with God's help, was able to compose and write down Mishnayos, what happens next? So I'm going to continue. It looks like 10 lines from the bottom of the page, 1373, the line that begins Hashamayim. So it says like this, however, Hamishnayos hadvorim hem bekitzur ma'od. In Mishnayos, as you look at a Mishnah, how long is a Mishnah? Some are 5 lines, some are 2 lines, some are 10 lines. There are Mishnahs 20 lines. But a Mishnah is generally speaking quite brief, relatively speaking. It's longer than a pasuk. A verse can be 1 word, and you can have a whole discussion on that. But the bekitzur ma'od, the Mishnayos are very brief. So as we learned earlier, that for the people like the Tanoim, that brevity had everything in it. Even the Braisos are included in it. Definitely all the explanations. But that was for people who understood it or on that level. It's like when you talk to one brilliant person speaks to another and teaches, they can say it in 1 line, in 2 lines, 5 lines, and they'll understand it. I want to see where he spelled that out explicitly when he spoke about Braisa. Yeah. The bottom of page 1370 explained it more detailed. Okay, so it's bekitzur ma'od. Furthermore, v'kama dvarim stumim, and a number of things remain sealed or closed. In other words, you can read it, and if you're not a Tana, you may not understand it. V'yesh mehem, additionally, another point in the Mishnah, there are things stated in the Mishnah she'enim la'alacha, that is just an opinion. That's not the halacha. The final halacha is not there. Because we said before that Rebbe, when he composed the Mishnah, or compiled it, he brought all the shmurs, even things that were not necessarily the final resolution. Chachamim, Tanakama, v'chachamim, they're different things, different opinions, and those opinions go back generations. So not everything is la halacha. The Mishnah is not the final halacha. Even though everything is accurately conveyed, but it's not necessarily la halacha. Why? Kehem das yichidah. The Mishnah can have a das yachid, which means it's one person's opinion. And he brings an example in the parentheses. Like the Mishnah says in the first chapter of Adius, one of the tractates. Where it actually says, why are you mentioning the Divrei Yachid, just an individual's opinion? So what do you see from this? That individual opinions are stated. You have Rabbi Yehuda Amar, Chacham is plural, but the point being, you have individuals that are speaking. Ubaharba Mishnayis, and in numerous Mishnayis, Loi Nema Shein Das Yochid. Doesn't always say. In many of the Mishnayis, it just tells you the opinion. It doesn't tell you it's just an individual. Ube'emes Shein Divrei Yochid. Even though in truth it is an individual. So in other words, in the Mishnah, even though Rabbeinu HaKadosh did accurately compile, everything is emes lamite, completely truthful compilation and collection of everything that was said. But firstly, it's bekitzur ma'od, very short. There are a number of things that are stumim, that are like sealed or locked or concealed. And there are things that are not la halacha, but rather just an opinion of one person. And as a result, umezeh bo hastiras b'mishnayis. And this in turn caused contradictions. Because you could have a das yachin and one Mishnah says one thing. You could have another daya and another Mishnah says a different thing. And there's a contradiction. There's no contradiction because fundamentally because both opinions were received from Sinai, like we learned. But still, from the point of view of us learning it, you're not sure what to do here or how to make sense of it. So that's the status. Remember in the previous paragraph, the previous page at the bottom of the page, the beginning of the paragraph, he said that it comes to also resolve Mishnayis Asesim Zum Azu. Comes to reconcile contradictory Mishnayis. Okay. So now comes the Talmud. V'zeu inyan Talmud. And this is the function or the purpose or the role of Talmud. Talmud is now the next generation of Amirayim. Shahu Pirush HaMishnayis. They come to explain and comment on and explain the Mishnayis. Ubir Amkeiseha. And explain and clarify or Pirush. I would say Pirush should mean interpret the Mishnayis and explain its depth. Shemezeh boim, and that in turn, from that was derived, from that emerges kama prate adinim, a number of detailed laws. Shem ba Mishnah beremes bilvad. That when you break it down and you start analyzing and understanding. In the Mishnah, it's only hinted to, alluded to. And you don't necessarily have the specific definition of these laws. But in the Talmud, when these students began to analyze and dissect, etc., they came out with prate hadinim. Like we learned, remember the previous page as well, that there were dinim actually that not in the Mishnah, that they were not makabel. They're dinim that you're makabel, that we said that's part of Mishnah. What about the dinim that the Amirayim derived from their discussions? That's Talmud. And it continues what the Talmud does. V'himidu halacha al burya, and they established the halacha clearly, where the Mishnah, like he said, was not necessarily clearly what the conclusion was. Like very often you'll find the Tanakama says one thing, the Chachamim say something else, and the Gemara they'll say, so which way does it go? What do we rule? And the Amirayim will start a whole discussion. I heard this from my teacher, this one, and they argue logic as well as bringing sources. And then they say, based on that, here's what the halacha may be. is. But how do they come to this halacha? This is not through Kabbalah. It's not like if someone says, I heard it from my teacher, that's the halacha, then it goes back into the category of Mishnah. That's what they did till then, that everything was passed on. Here it comes al yedei hakushis, b'ha Mishnah, through the questions they ask about the Mishnah. B'hastiris mezulazu, and the contradictions from one to the other. V'amru, hamani Rebbe pleni. And they say this is a classic example of an expression in the Talmud. What was said, by which Rebbe said which, meaning associating who exactly said what. Oi hocha b'mayaskinon, like he cited earlier. Qualifying and saying, here's hocha, in this situation, what are they discussing? In other words, it's qualifying. Even though we read it in the Mishnah, it not necessarily covers all the circumstances, all situations. So meaning that the student, the Amoraim, the Talmud, is evaluating. So it's through questions, through contradictions, and establishing who says what, which scholar, which sage says what exactly, and what are they, in what situation they're talking about. Umizeh, from this elaborate Talmudic process, mizbarer hadin v'halacha, the law and the edict or the conclusion and the halacha, the law and the final halacha was established, is established. So here's the addition that Talmud does that Mishnah did not have. V'kol, let's read on. We're going to stop at some point for further for questions or clarification, but I think let's get the whole picture here. V'kol, all this process we just described is not through Kabbalah, he's going to explain. This is not what they received. Hu bepilpul rav. It's with long, elaborate back and forth. Pilpul. Not pilpul is discussion, dialogue, arguments even. Bekushis, with questions, v'tirutzim, and answers, meaning arguments and counter-arguments, questions and answers. Umatech pilpulam. And from their discussions, their elaborate brainstorming, if you wish, their elaborate discussions and back and forth, nischatshu harbe dinim v'halachos. A number, quite a few, many laws and edicts were innovated. Nischatshu. And now he explains clearly, v'halachos elu hu shechitzu b'keyach atzman. Remember the expression, these halachas are not what they heard from their teachers. This is what came out of their discussions. Like always, when you discuss something and break it down. I mean, think lahavdil, even you have a business meeting, right? A brainstorm session. And certain points are brought. The leader of the team says, here's the idea that we have on the table. Let's now dissect it. And you start breaking it down in details. You start realizing new revelations, new ideas come up. Because it always happens that way. Whenever you delve into something and you start looking at all the details and there's contradictions and this argument and that argument, new things are going to emerge. That came through their discussion, through their conversation, through their negotiation. And these halachas are not a Kabbalah ish mepi'ish. This is already coming from human discussion. Yes, we're talking about high-level sages. We're not just talking about people in the street. Real great minds and great scholars and Torah people and God-fearing people. But still, it's not the Kabbalah ish pi'ish that we spoke about till now. The Mishnah is until that stage. Now we're talking about things that are being, the Mishnah is that there was, the Kabbalah ish pi'ish is now being evaluated and discussed. And from this emerged new halachas. But now needs a qualification. What does that mean, new halachas? We all know everything has to come from Sinai. So the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain that in the parentheses. He says like this. And though this is a Gemara that says, everything, a Vosik, a Talmud Vosik means an excellent, a gifted student Vasik is when you say the special student, an experienced student. I mean, there's a lot of meanings in the word Vasik, but it's not just a student. It's saying even an excellent student. Everything that Osid Lema, that he will say, the student, knows the student learns from a teacher, and then he elaborates and discusses it and will innovate things even. So sometimes the Lashon is Osid Lechadish. Here he says Osid Lema. But there's a nusach also Osid Lechadish, which I thought he would bring, because that's even stronger. That's something that he innovates. But regardless, everything that a great student will say in the future, Hakol Nemru, next page, 1374, LaMoshe Sinai. Everything was said to Moshe Sinai. So what do you mean by Koyach Atzma? Why are you saying that the Talmud is innovating things that are not Kabbalah Ish Mipish? Everything came from Moshe from Sinai. Seems like it contradicts what we just learned. So here's the answer. B'kol Mokem, nevertheless, Loi Hoyezeh Bizgalus. It was not revealed. It's not like they knew what was said by Moshe Sinai and say, oh, we're deriving from that this and this conclusion. It means everything Moshe received was like a nucleus, like a seed. So no matter what tree will grow from it, it's all encompassed there. But it doesn't mean that it was revealed. It doesn't mean that they had access to it. Mishnah is, like we learned, is they actually received and they heard. Memtes ponim tome, memtes ponim toyer. 49 positions or arguments that it's impure and 49 that it's pure. Those are actual svaras, actual theories that they received. Here we're saying it's all encompassed in there. But in what form? It's not in a revealed state. To reveal it, that came from their own effort. That was not something they heard. So if they heard it from their teacher, then it's not Koyach Atzma. Then if let's say one of the Amoraim says, I heard from my teacher so-and-so, so then it's in the category of that was passed on. Bottom line, it's saying that Matan Torah, the Torah, has everything in it. But that doesn't mean we have access to it. Sometimes it's expressed when you say, so why do we call it Osig Talmud Vasig Lechadish? Why do you call it the Chiddush of the student? Because in the Torah, it's a klal. It's like sometimes you have a klal and a prat. Someone gives you a general principle, but you draw out a specific. So even though the detail came from the general principle, but no one saw it there. You see this very often in science, even in other schools of thought. Someone may have innovated an idea 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago, and it could be generations later, someone took that idea, and out of that, they created a postulate. It's like theorems and postulates in math that no one had thought of till now. But you could always trace it back to the original, even though it's an innovation of the student. So he's the one that he revealed it. That's what he's adding in this parentheses. And how did they do so? B'mesiras nafsham al chochma satera. It didn't come easy. It comes with their full giving their lives, their blood, sweat, and tears, essentially. That mesiras nefesh of the wisdom of Torah wasn't superficially just looking at something. Complete immersion, complete dedication, and devotion to the wisdom of Torah. That allowed them to extract chidushim with their own strength that are included and encompassed in the seed of Torah, so to speak, given to Moshe by Sinai. Like it says in Shalah, page 25. Remember, he referred before to the pages. What did he say? So there he brings the pasuk that says that by Matan Torah was a very powerful voice, Kel Godel, v'lo Yosaf, that did not cease, v'lo Yosaf v'lo Pasak. It was a unwavering and unceasing voice. So the Shalah brings, I think he brings this maybe from Medrash. What does that mean? Because the voice of God, when the Torah was given, was such that went for generations. It was a voice that would echo and reverberate through the generations. And when the Amoraim and the students learn something with Mesiras Nefesh, they're able to draw from that voice and mechadeh something with their own koyach. So that's the point. So in other words, by Matan Torah was a tremendous revelation. But that doesn't mean that everything that was revealed in a way that we can draw from it. But student, through Mesiras Nefesh, can draw from there. That's what he qualifies. So therefore, it's different than Kabbalah Ish Mipi'ish. Kabbalah Ish Mipi'ish is absolutely revealed. It's revealing it directly. One teacher taught it to his student, the student taught it to his student, and that's the Kabbalah. But through the pilpul of the Amoraim and the Talmud, they added something. They were able to draw new halachas that were also encompassed in what Matan Torah, because everything comes from Torah. But it's new because nobody saw it revealed till now. What's that? One second. It's like it says, Gilu Zeh B'Keach Atzma. Yeah. He didn't finish yet. We still have more to say on this. I'm going to read. I just want to give an example. I think this example is brought in other Maimorim on this topic, or maybe not, but it's still a good example. Example we've learned already a number of times. The difference between drawing out a fire from a hot coal and drawing out a fire or sparks from flintstone. So both of them can generate fire, but it's very different. One is called in Chassidus Helam Sheyeshnu b'mitzias and Helam She'ena b'mitzias. What does that mean? A hot coal, when you look at it, it can seem dead. It can seem that it's already burned out. But if, God forbid, you touch it or you get close to it, you feel there's heat. Or you put it in water, you see immediately the water will extinguish it. Where do you need to do there? You need to fan the coal. Not much effort. If you fan it, or you put something on top of it, it can suddenly burst into flames. That shall have us kshura b'gechelas. Then there's a flintstone, surah chalomish, or even chalomish, called a flintstone. Here, you can touch the stone, it's cool, no problem, you won't get burned. You could put the stone in water, nothing will extinguish. And yet, when you strike the stone, either with another stone or with a very sharp object, sparks will fly from it. So Chassidus uses that as an example of a helam she'ena b'mitzias. Is it encompassed in the stone? Absolutely, because if you strike something else, you won't get sparks. But you need a very strong effort. That's called yegia. In Samach Vav, he explains the yegia in Torah is when a person breaks their head to try to understand something, is the striking of the stone of your mind to draw out kipati shefetz sela, like when you strike with an anvil on a stone, you see the sparks flying. So the same idea. So I thought it's a good example to explain the difference between Kabbalah Ish Mipi'ish, even if they literally received it, or it's there, but it was just a matter of revealing easily, or something that requires an effort. It's still rooted in the stone, so it's still rooted in Matan Torah. However, you need this Mesiras Nefesh that these students are able to draw from it. We're going to learn how Talmud, even though it's coming b'koyach atzmam, we're going to learn similar to what we learned earlier about Ein Oid, that the darker it is and the more work you put in, you actually draw an energy that wasn't there before. If you remember the Oir Chodosh, or even the Helam Atzmi, where does it come from? Only when you do something with your effort from below, because Oir can only reveal Oir. If you want to reach a level that's very deep level, you need to have this type of effort. We're going to learn that as well, that Talmud actually has that Maila. I'm only saying it because we learned this idea, and it may evoke certain ideas in you that remind us of what we learned. Before we learned it in Tefillah from the bottom up. Now we're learning it in Torah. But let's not jump the gun. I don't want to go before we get he'll get to that. Right now, we've established that Talmud is different than Mishnah in this context, that through their effort and through their exertion in trying to clarify the points, like he just explained, the contradictions, the questions, establishing what's a das yachid, who said what the circumstance, which is what Talmud does, that creates this the chidushim of new halachas b'kayach atzmam, like he just said, gilu zeh b'kayach atzmam. Now he's going to explain now what this means in actual the levels that we learned. So what's the difference between Mishnah and Talmud now? So he says like this, and then we'll pause. V'hainu, this means What's the difference between Talmud and Mishnah? She'ena meir behem me'er de Chochma law kamei Mishnah. By these students, meaning the next generation of Amoraim, they in them did not radiate the light of the supernal Chochma of the Torah Shebiksav. Here he says, he's going to say specifically in the next line, Torah Shebiksav. In Mishnah, we learned before, why did they have such clarity? Because they were still like a flame from a flame in a direct chain without any dilution that allowed them to access all the way back to Moshe. That's the Chochma. It's not through their effort. Their effort was remembering it, retaining it, documenting it. But here we're talking about it's not radiating for Chochma. Kumay Mishnah. When we say that which was received by Kabbalah, which is the Mishnayos, till Moshe Rabbeinu, who received the Mepi Agvura from the mouth of God, that the Chochma law, V'hainu, Shezem the Chochma law, the Torah Shebiksav, that's Mishnah. That means from the light and energy and the force of the supernal Chochma of the written Torah, Mikra, Shemeir b'Chochma Tato, b'Torah Shemal Peh, Torah Shemal Peh, that radiates and illuminates the lower Chochma of Torah Shemal Peh, of the oral Torah. So there's a correct connection between the oral and the written. That's Mishnah. Canal. Aval halachish and ischatshu b'Talmud, but the halachas that were innovated in the Talmud, b'teicha pilpul, that came from a discussion and from a dialogue and from this whole process we learned, the Talmudic process, eina b'Kabbalah. That was not received. They did not receive that. The eina meir behem b'chinas Chochma law. And there does not radiate the Chochma law of the previous generations, all the way back to Moshe, that is, the Chochma law of Torah Shebiksav. Varaya. Okay, stop. We'll stop here a second. He's now going to go further, that even, he's going to bring proof to this. But that's the distinction between Mishnah and Talmud. So we see now, next generation level of Torah, same Torah, talking about, God forbid to say it's a different Torah. It's Gemara is an explanation of Mishnah. Talmud is an explanation of Mishnah. But it's now much more, you see the human effort in it and the human contribution. Whereas a Mishnah, even though you can't deny that Mishnah does require brilliance by the Tanoim, but there it was much more about making sure to pass on that which was given to us before and clarify it as much as possible. Talmud takes it to the next level qualitatively. I will stop here before we go on right now, just to, since I read for a little while, if anybody has questions and clarify things. He's going to bring a proof to this, but I think we can, this is pretty much the picture, and we're going to read more about it shortly. Does anybody want to pause for a question, comment, anything?
Important to emphasize that the Amoraim, they were megale through Mesiras Nefesh. They reached this level. Otherwise, everyone that is a smart guy, even in our time, could say, I am like the Amoraim. But no, the Amoraim, they, like you said, Ibn Chalomish and the Shalavasur Shobalis, they walked in Mesiras Nefesh and they reached them.
And I'll go further. And they also follow the rules of Torah. The Yud Gimel Midrash HaTorah Nidreshes them. They didn't come up with exactly right you said. It's not anyone in the street or anyone can say, I can do that because there's B'Koyach Atzma. They did it based on a mizgeres, a certain structure and rules. It's just like somebody can get up and say, hey, I innovated a new medical intervention that can prevent heart attacks. No, you have to be based on what came before. However, it can be something you innovated, but it's within the framework of and the rules, the existing rules. I'm just adding Mesiras Nefesh, but also they didn't go over the reservation, God forbid. That's the point. In other words, an Amoira can't come and suddenly say, hey, you know what? Because the shul is distant, I found a source that we can drive on Shabbos, for example. That's not in his purview, in his domain. It has to be Yud Gimel Midas Shater Nidreshes B'hem has to be upheld. Just like you have a musician that can take the same musical notes or a song and present a new rendition of it, but he's not going into a complete. He's not creating a new musical note. He's basing it on the principles that we have. So that's, I'm just amplifying, elaborating a bit on what you just touched on.
Okay, this is also explaining how come that an Amoiro cannot go against Hatana.
Right, exactly. He can analyze the Tana and he can find contradictions and actually derive something new that the Tana may not have said, but he can't blatantly go ahead and say exactly that which was mekabola ish mepi ish. Amoraim don't have the power to ignore that or to go against that. We're talking about taking it further. So in other words, the Kabbalah was so and so, but now let's take it further. Yeah. Good. Any questions? Any other questions or comments? Okay. Okay. So now he's going to bring a raya to this. Raya. And here's a raya to this point. To which point? To the point that this was not coming from Kabbalah Ishma Pish, so the Gemara, that is. So he says like this: Shagamba Braises, going back to Braises. Remember, Braises are not Talmud. Braises is the Tanoim teaching the next level, so to speak, outside, as we learned earlier, outside the Beis Medrash to a lower level. Braises Bizman Bayesheni, we learned. So even when it comes to Braises, which is from a Tanoim, Amru, the Gemara says, is Amru, we say, Kol masnisa, the loy masne b'chanina v'Rabbi Elazar. Lav masnisa. Every Mishnah that... What did I say? I said, what did I say? Chananya?
Said Chanina, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Ishaya, they were writing the Braises.
1 second, it says Rabbi Elazar, no? Aleph.
No. Oishaya.
Oh, Oishaya. Oh, okay. My mistake then. Yeah, Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Shaya. So it says, Kol Masnisa. The Lei Masni be Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Ishaya.
Ishaya.
Ishaya. Lav Masnisa. If they did not teach it, these two individuals who are the ones that composed all the Braises, it's not considered masnisa. What does that tell you? Why? Hainu she'enam vadoyin ubrudim she'em b'divrei Kabbalah. Because it didn't come from them, then we're not sure, and it's not clear whether they're divrei Kabbalah. In other words, they were the only ones that had the authority to establish that this was Kabbalah. So what do you see from that? That even when it comes to Abraisa, if it doesn't come from Rab Chanina and Rab Ishia,
Rabbi Chia.
That's what I said. Rab Chia and Rab Ishia. Yeah.
They were Rebbe's Talmidim, Rabbeinu HaKodesh.
Right. So bottom line is, so you see that even when a Braisa, which is coming from Tanoim, if it was not taught from them, then it's not considered a Mishnah because we can't say for sure it's Kabbalah. So how much more so Talmud is not Kabbalah? That's what he's saying basically. Val derech, and he's also bringing an example for this. Shloish alofim halachas shenitztachu b'yemei avlei shel Moshe. In the days when they were mourning over Moshe Rabbeinu, so Gemara says 3,000 laws were forgotten all the way back then. What does that tell you? What means forgotten? Because in other words, they don't have the Kabbalah for it. So we see that there's halachas that were passed on and we have. There are halachas that were forgotten. And there are halachas we're not sure, if it's not taught by Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Ishia, we're not sure The chach inye masnisa doi masne be Rabchia v'Rabeshia. Einen vadoin kol kach. And same thing with the things taught that were not taught, rather, by these two individuals, Rabchia and Rabeshia. They're not sure, so we're not so certain. That's why we don't consider it a brayse. V'hainu, what does that mean? That these things that we're not sure about. That's what it means. No one's taking away that it could be Torah Shabbal Peh. But to say that it has Chochma law in it, which is what the Mishnah and the Brisa has, that you can't say. And this is due to the fact shehein mebriya v'lei ma'atzilus. This is due to the fact that the Talmud is from Bria and not from Atzilus. Ki b'Atzilus meir b'chinas Chochma law, because Atzilus radiates this higher supernal Chochma. V'alkein ha-Mishnah Braises the Rabchia v'Rabeshia hu shenimshach b'hem b'chinas Chochma law, and that's why the Mishnah and the Braises, which is from Rabchia v'Rabeshia, is in them they have transmitted. They have the Chochma law of Atzilus. V'arihu b'chinas Chochma brura, and that's level of clear and crystallized Chochma. The Mishnah and the Braises. Okay. Now comes a parenthesis till the end. I'm going to skip the parenthesis. I'm just going to read the last line outside the parentheses, and then there's another parenthesis. He says, "Bekolshkein." So if that's the case, even one second. If that's the case, even with brises that were not taught by Rabchia and Rabeshia, Bekolshkein halachas the Amoraim. And for certainly the halachas of the Amoraim, she'ein behem gili b'chinas Chochma law, that don't have in them the Chochma law, that because so they for sure are not this level of clarity that the Mishnah has that we just learned. So I skipped the parentheses, which we will learn. We need to learn. Maybe I'll do it right now. I just wanted to read that last line. You wanted to ask something?
Mishnayos are in Atzilus, we learn they are in Chagas. That means Chagas the Atzilus?
Well, Pashtus probably means that Chabad and Chagas, like Mikra is Chabad, that's for sure. It manifests in Asiyah. Mishnah Chagas is like the Etzem of Atzilus. It could be because Talmud originates in the He of Atzilus. Nehi is already Ragler Yerdes. It's like Mechutz. Like remember, we learned even Braisa is Labar, goes outside. For sure, Talmud. So I think what he's saying here is that even though it originates in the He of Atzilus, so there's some Atzilus there, but primarily it manifests in Bria. That's how I would explain. I understand because it's very clear that he said all three originate in Atzilus. I believe also this is going to be explained later. But right now, he's definitely saying that basically in Mishnah radiates more powerfully Atzilus than in Talmud. That's how I would establish it right now. And in Talmud is more Bria. So Bria on one hand is going to be a lot of explanation, and Seichel is there, but the Elokus is more diminished and more concealed. That means the Chochma law. And that's why it doesn't have the same. It's a next level. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Hold on a second. 1 second. Actually, I should say something further, Reb Shlomo, that the parentheses actually qualifies it. So you know what? Let me read the parentheses and then I'll take questions. So let me read the parentheses quickly. Vagamden is boil ill. See that even though we explained earlier the Mishnah be Yitzira, we said Mishnah is Yitzira. If you're talking in Atzilus, then Chabad, Chagas, Nehi, Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, fine. But if you're talking Elamus, then Talmud is Bria, Mishnah is Yitzira, Mikra is Asiya. Ubraisa is Basiya, we learned. We learned earlier Braisa because it's Labar, it's like the Nehi of the Chagas that goes into Asiya, we learned. Hanimakom Mokim, Hein bebchinas chagas v'nehi da Atzilus sheyordu v'nislapshu b'yitzira v'asiyah. So even though it's true that Mishnah and Brisa goes down into Yitzira and Asiyah, but nevertheless, they are fundamentally chagas and nehi of Atzilus that go down into Yitzira and Asiyah. How about Talmud? Didn't we learn that Talmud is also nehi of Atzilus? So I'm not sure. Let me just read quickly the parentheses and see if he's going to qualify. It says, "Ve'ikira inyan kan hushen izbaru b'bchinas birur sheni." Oh, okay. And the primary thing we're discussing here is that the birur of Torah, which is the whole point of Mishnah and Brisa and Talmud, is clarity, clarification, birur. That is birur sheni. So what I think he's trying to say is he referring to Talmud? That maybe Talmud is birur sheni, that's why we're not talking about how it's in Atzilus, we're talking how it's in Bria. Or is he saying that Mishnah and Brisa in Atzilus is birur rishon, and the way it comes into Yitzir and Asiyah is birur sheni? Not sure. Let me read it inside, and we'll see if I can figure it out. Shari shema de chochmi law. Okay, ma is not ban. Shema of chochmi law hu Torah shebiksav. That's clear. Chochmi law is the written Torah mikra, clear. Chochmi law Chabad. Ubetera shebapeh hu sheba b'chinas yichud ma ban. And the oral Torah becomes a yichud of ma, of a oir, pure oir. That's connecting with ban, which is already the birur, an explanation of Mishnah and Brisa and so on. Uber Mishnah Brisa is the Rab Chanina v'Rabbi Shia hu shemer behem b'chinas ma the Chochma begili. There, the name Shem Ma of Chochmei Law radiates revealed. Mashenkin b'halachas is the Talmud, but not in halachas of Talmud. Ukamoshi is boy. Yeah, I think he's talking about Talmud, like it shall be explained. See, v'zeu gamkin the Brisa is the lemas nisim bei. Rab Chanina, Rab Chia v'Rabbi Shia ein vadoin ubrudim b'chinas gil the Chochmei Law. There's kamei Chochma brudim. And that's where the brises that were not taught by Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shia, they're not certain and clear, which means they don't have the gili of Chochmei Law to be such a Chochma Brura. So bottom line is, in the Mishnah and the Brisa is still radiating the Chochmei Law of Shema of Atzilus. There is already the beginning of Ban, because they are Birur. There are a Birur, Mishnah and Brisa. But I think he's trying to say is that Talmud is a further birur, like a birur sheni, and that's in Bria. U'kamoshi is bad, as shall be explained. That's what I believe he's saying in the parentheses. I need to look at it again, and also want to see what he's going to explain later. So he does qualify this. We need a little more explanation, or a lot more explanation, but that's the bottom line. So I'm going to stop here, end of the paragraph, and then he says, and for sure the halachas of the Amoraim Talmud, Ulechei nikra alomes ukamesha kosev b'mokem acher. So Chassidus, the Medrash says Mishnayis elu ha Mishnayis elu hanoshim, they're like the wife. Braisis elu apelakshim v'alomes ein mispur. The alomes is the halachas of Talmud, and why is it called alomes? Comes from the word also helam, concealment. That's what he's saying here. They don't have the gilui. So he didn't discuss Pilegesh here, but in the Maimonim in Shmois, in Teira Er Shmois and other places, discussed it. Maybe I'll sum it up the next year. And with this, we conclude this paragraph. Okay, take it away. Any questions?
My question was, if on the one hand, Talmud is rooted in Nehi of Atzilus, I think you said, but yet it contains no Chochma Ila. Now, I think even we said Talmud is Chochma of Nehi, if I'm not mistaken. So how can we reconcile those 2 points?
What are the 2 points?
We said that I think we said that Talmud is Nehi of Atzilus, and specifically Chabad of Nehi.
And that's what I've been just addressing now at length.
But I haven't asked the question yet.
He answered. What's the question? Go ahead.
On the one hand, we have this position this tenet that the Talmud is Chabad of Nehi, of Atzilus. On the other hand, it says that Talmud, meaning Gemara, doesn't have any Chochma Ila. So how can you reconcile those two things?
Chochma Tata it has. Tersha Apes Chochma Tata. Chochma law is the radiating of the of Mad Atzilus of Mikra of Tersha B'Ksav. So Tersha B'Ksav is Chochma law. Talmud is Chochma Tata. That's why it's Nehi.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And remember, to say it has no Chochma law is also incorrect. It does have Chochma, just not radiating within it like the Mishnah. Because the Talmud is also ultimately based on the Mishnah, which is ultimately based on the written Torah. But right now, we're talking very practically, like he said, the Amoraim, they derive their conclusions not because they received it from Chochmei law, from previous generations to Matan Torah, but from their own process and development and through their minds, through their effort, Mesiras Nefesh. That's the key distinction that he made here.
In Shir HaShirim it said, Shishim heimo melochois, u'shmoin tilagshim v'alomois ein mispol.
Right. So the Shishim and Melachis is the Mishnah, Melachis, the queens, and the Pelakshim is the Brises, and the Alomis is Talmud, the Halachis and Talmud. Yeah. Correct.
Rabbi Jacobson, can we also tie in the whole concept of Mispor Sapir, the whole idea that one was telling a story, one was illumination and one was just recounting? Could that be tied into this?
Into the three Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud?
Yes.
I think we'll understand it better when he goes back to the three Eir HaMakabel, the moon, the bright stone, and vision. I think that's what will be more fitting to talk about it. You probably could connect it with Mikra being the most brilliant, most light. But I would wait to see how he explains the three levels of the Eir Makabel, and then we can discuss the connection to the three levels of spheres. But most likely it's connected.
Why are you translating Almonos as just the concealments? I mean, it means literally the widows.
But it also has the word Helam. That's what Chassidus explains.
I see it, and it's a beautiful taich. But I mean, what about the pshat?
Like anything, a pshat, Olam means world, but it also comes from the word Helam v'hester. There's in Hebrew, if a word has more than one meaning, so it could have its basic meaning, and then its deeper explanation.
But hold on, you translated Mikra as Nashim. You translated the Mishnah as whatever the maidservants. I forget what the word was, but essentially
Pelakshim.
Pelakshim, and so if you're taking this kind of woman and then this kind of woman, and then Talmud is Amanos, it's widows. Now I understand there's a Chassidic.
Actually, Alamis is not widows. I think Alamis is psulis, virgins.
Young girls are alomis.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but that's not relevant to the point. And so be it. And then there's a deeper meaning in those words.
Okay. Sorry, I misread it. I'm tired. Remember, it's 6:30, 7:30 by me. I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. But it does the basic meaning is three levels. One is queens, concubines, and psulas, virgins, young women, maidens, if you wish. And what he explains is that a wife is the yichud is complete, a pelegish, a yichud is not complete, and with alomis, the yichud is not there altogether because there's no relationship yet. That's why it's a concealed state.
See, I pushed a beautiful answer out of you. Okay.
No, I said I would elaborate. This is from the I'm even quoted the source. Shmois, Torah Eir Shmois discusses this, and as well as other places.
Shkar, thank you very much.
Okay, so we shall stop here at the end of the paragraph 13:7.